Anyway, tonight Nick is going to talk about elections that are coming up on the 11th of May in Pakistan, the ramifications of this, and the implications for subcontinent, in my view, subcontinent peace, and in some respects the fate of the world. So Nick, we're pleased to have you here tonight. Over to you.
Everybody. And thanks very much for coming. I was only reminded yesterday that it was Anzac Day tomorrow, so people want to make a 4-day weekend of it. Yeah, when you tell your mum that you're off to Pakistan for 8 months, her reaction is, I think it can politely be described as concerned, certainly interested, and then when you come back after a couple of months and you speak a little bit of Urdu and some Arabic, it goes to alarmed. And then after 8 months, when you've got a dodgy beard and a suntan and a kameez, that's what she calls in the feds. This says I'm not like many other people here, an academic or a diplomat. I'm a pollster. So my job is to run campaigns and try and affect some change. So I'm not a neutral player in this. What I want to talk about for the next 20 minutes or so is why this election matters, where Pakistan is at the moment. Some reasons to despair. The original talk was going to be called Descent into Chaos or New Hope or something very Star Warsy like that. That title was taken from Ahmed Rashid's book because he believes that is what is happening to the country right now, and it couldn't be more important. I'm more optimistic than that, so I've gone for Now or Never, which is the title of the Pakistani independence movement, and the same group of people came from near my hometown in Cambridge who coined the PAK acronym. As most of you will know, there is no Pakistan, there's no group of people called the PAKs. It's an acronym for Pashtun, Afghan, Kashmiri, Stan, meaning homeland. So some reasons to despair first of all, and then I'll hopefully cheer you up with some reasons to be cheerful, and then some conclusions about what happens next. So if you look at where Pakistan is situated, 200 million people, well that's the best guess that we have because nobody actually knows how many people live in Pakistan. The last census was conducted over 15 years ago. It's right on the front line of the war on terror. The massive neighbour to the right that isn't labelled, but you will know, being such an eminent audience, that this is China, and Pakistan is has the most pro-Chinese population on earth. 87% of the people believe that they have a favourable view of China, but more importantly, I think, is India. If you look down here, you start to understand why everything in Pakistan, from the military to the public and politicians, see their worldview is defined by the view of India, and a sort of paranoia and a fear of the neighbour to the southeast. If you sit in Islamabad, we are obviously fair weather friends, governments of all different stripes, Americans, British, Democrat, Republican, it doesn't really matter. We've come through the neighbourhood and then left again. You will all be able to think of different examples. So we are necessarily fair weather friends when it comes to alliances and things like that. The election is a big deal. It's the first, or will be first fully democratic transfer of power since independence. I think that's where we should start off. Is that this is not going to be a Jeffersonian, free and fair election of the kind that we might be familiar with in the West. It's not going to be a perfect poll. Violence, patronage, pork, corruption are all major problems. Excuse me, pork barreling.
Pork barreling is
I know, I should probably come up with a better phrase than that. But the sense of history, if you come back, if you're in Islamabad, as I was until yesterday, the sense of history is absolutely palpable. Even Musharraf, who you probably have read, the ex-military dictator, came back 10 days or so ago saying he'd arrived to save the country and ended up scurrying off in an SUV in a desperate attempt to save himself. The sense of timing is absolutely incredible. The electorate is engaged. They're utterly disenchanted with the people who are in charge, but they're very engaged. And this is why the number of general elections in the last 65 years, Australia obviously leads the way. Pakistan is a long way behind, and most of those, in fact all of them, have been not exactly at the barrel of a gun, but the military has had an immense influence. So a peaceful transfer of power between one party and another will be a huge achievement. This is an election, what an election poster looks like in Islamabad. You see, this is for the PPP, the People's Party. They're the incumbents under President Zardari, unaffectionately known as Mr. 10%. More importantly, Mr. Zardari's wife, Benazir Bhutto, is, as you all know, the former Prime Minister. And her shadow looms large. I think it was Christopher Hitchens who said that her murder was a disaster because there was good reason to believe that she was willing to lead a battle against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda axis. She had started to sever the connection with her questionable husband, now the president. She was the only candidate with a mass appeal to set against the siren call of the fundamentalists. Right to the end, she carried on without the fetish of security and with lofty disregard for her own safety. The government that's followed her assassination over the last 5 years is now massively unpopular. 13% is the poll rating that Mr. Zardari gets, and that's because the economy is a disaster zone. 90% dissatisfied with the economy. There is a chronic shortage of jobs, and the energy supply is a joke. This is where a lot of his support is hemorrhaging to. The smiley face at the top right will be familiar to you as Imran Khan, the captain of the World Cup winning 1992 Pakistan cricket team, and now the most popular politician in the country. And his mixture is a sort of moderate Islamism with some fairly rash policy pronouncements, such as promising to end terror within 90 days. He's massively personally popular, but he has no party infrastructure. I should emphasise that his party is a new creation. It's not called the Imran Khan Party, it's called PTI, but effectively that's what it is. So I think when it comes to election day, he's going to be found wanting, because you need the people guiding the voters to vote the right way, to remind them of their feudal duties, the patronage, that kind of thing. But he's a huge force to be reckoned with. This is the situation right now, and you get this. The reason I'm putting this slightly boring picture of the National Assembly up is so you can see what Zardari's had to manage. President Zardari, the ex-Mr. Bhutto, he's got an ever so slight minority government, and that gives you a sense of the deals that he's had to do to stay on top of this kind of slightly rickety parliamentary structure. One thing I would point out is that Pakistan actually has a better record than Britain for female representation in Parliament, but we move on. The picture is fairly clear. I'm going to show you three slides in quick succession on Pakistani people's views of who leads on the economy, security and education. So this is the economy. That's security, the PMLN, which is the Pakistani Muslim League, has a 15-point lead on security. And then education. Now, I hope you saw that there's basically no difference. And what this teaches you is that actually people don't vote on issues in Pakistan. The thing that's driving the vote is much more to do with dissatisfaction with the current mob, and then it comes down to loyalty of tribes, families. It's almost feudal in the way that people vote. Why the dissatisfaction? Well, this is your view on an average Pakistani night from your hotel window. The power cuts out about every 20 minutes of the month. It's actually got worse since the government has gone into what they call caretaker mode. And so if you're trying to type an email or Skype a loved one or whatever, it gets incredibly frustrating. Try and imagine if you were trying to cook dinner or educate a child, and you get a sense of that this is far more serious than it otherwise might be, and that's why energy supply, electricity is such a huge issue. They're symptomatic of government mismanagement. The Zardari era has been one of sclerosis and chaos. The government, meanwhile, the PPP uses the necessities of buying off coalition partners with patronage and favours and lots of money, and that's the sort of fig leaf for chronic overspending. Only in Pakistan. Reasons to despair. The ally from hell. This is a picture of Karachi. That's a fake nuke being paraded around by a separatist Islamist group, but it's a sort of faintly comic picture that tells a deadly serious story. The huge question is obviously what happens to Pakistan's nukes. Are they secure? Pakistanis say that obviously they are, but it's potentially the biggest threat that people face at the moment. The US-Pakistan relationship to me is, I think it's like a marriage that's failing, where both are sleeping in separate bedrooms, both lying to the other one, both sleeping around, but each needs the other still. The US depends on Pakistan to project power in what they call AFPAC. Drone strikes, unmanned drones have massively increased under Obama. War on terror policies, whatever you want to call it, has continued apace, while, as I mentioned before, the Pakistan military is obsessed with India, remains obsessed with India. And the army is the most popular institution in the country. It's worth pointing that out. That's why this sort of militaristic pageantry has such resonance. Pakistan, though, still depends on the US for aid through the something called the Lugar-Kerry bill. So to carry on day to day, they need the money just to keep the government sort of ticking over. So in spite of there being incredible anti-American sentiment, what we see is all the politicians campaigning, claiming to have the support of the US, because there's nothing more terrifying than the thought of somebody getting in and that tap getting cut off. At the same time, the Obama administration maintains that drones have killed few, if any. The number that they say is in single figures. Try telling that to a Pakistani. The ISI, for their part, say that rogue elements within the Pakistani military have it's a problem of rogue elements that is arming and aiding the Taliban and other Islamist groups. That's not true either. Strikes in Afghanistan in 2008, 2009, 2012, when they haven't told Pakistani military what's going on, have seen inadvertently Pakistani security personnel killed. So it's a, if not an ally from hell, it's certainly a marriage from hell. And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said in Congress last September, this was the first time that somebody from the American government broke cover and said the Haqqani network, which is one of the terrorist networks, acts as an arm of Pakistan's inter-services intelligence agency. In other words, the two are indistinguishable. That's the first time that somebody had come out and said that. I did want to show you this. This is a sort of, because I didn't want to bore you completely with polling statistics. This was a picture from a hotel where I was cowering last October during the Day of Rage, because as I put up there, things are never what they seem in Pakistan. You may remember there was a YouTube video called The Innocence of Muslims, which is it's a clumsy and cretinous attempt to stoke the rage of the Muslim street. The Pakistani government never wanted to miss a trick, then instigated a day of love for the Prophet the following Friday after prayers. And so this is what happened. And there was no surprise about that. You saw tear gas on the streets, rubber bullets being fired, absolute mayhem. 18 people were killed. The reason for this was this picture. The picture they wanted to paint was of the creaking ally on the front line doing their best to hold back these nut jobs. So the very next day, you saw Rabani Carr, who's the 35-year-old and very toothsome foreign minister, meeting Hillary Clinton armed with pictures like these. Her message: more guns, more hardware, more money to help with the war on terror. The government's very adept at stoking the rage in public sentiment when it needs to. Reasons to despair, number 3. This could go on for a while, but I promise it won't. The country is on the edge of a fiscal cliff. Fewer than 1% of the population pay any tax. 95% of them, so imagine 95% of the 1% pay the lowest possible rate, the absolute bare minimum. It really is an optional extra. At the same time, the deficit is 7.5% and spiralling. There's massive debt on account of even the government not being able to keep the power on. So the near-term picture is incredibly grisly. The caretaker government is negotiating a bailout from the IMF right now, and that's unlikely to go through because it's a caretaker government, so it has no reason whatsoever to honour its obligations. And the IMF has pointed this out. Debt circle, as in borrowing in order to pay the people in order to pay their power bills, is such a common term now that even the cabbies, your Pakistani cabbie will know what it's referring to. The near-term picture is very grisly. Add on to that, sectarianism. This is from last week. Stop the Shia genocide. The sectarianism between Sunnis and Shias, as you know, most Muslims in the world are Sunni, but Pakistan has one of the largest Shia minorities anywhere. The number of Shias in Pakistan is larger than all the Shias in Iraq, for instance. That's just one level. Then you've got national rivalries with Afghanistan, India, this inter-Muslim fun and games on top of the ethnic divisions between Kashmiris, Punjabis, Afghans, Baluchis. Then below that you've got tribal rivalries and attacks between different groups, and then family feuds. At the very base level, you've got family feuds that end up in bloodshed. It's an incredibly complex and difficult to understand situation, and that's what will come to the fore in the election. So those are, I think, the 3 sort of the big challenges that Pakistan faces, and there aren't any easy answers to that, to the economic cliff, to the sectarianism and the almighty military. On the plus side, I try and cheer you up before you enter the booth tomorrow. The next 11 is a term coined by Jim O'Neill, and he was the gentleman who came up with the BRIC acronym for Brazil, Russia and China as the big economies that were emerging, and he was proven correct. He came up with that a decade ago. He's now identified what he calls the next 11, and this is based on something called the Growth Environment Score, that is macroeconomic stability and openness of trade investment and lots of other statistics that I don't understand. He's named Pakistan in that next 11 as one of the next 11 countries to come up and emerge. The big reason for this is that half the population is under the age of 25. So that's over 100 million people coming to working age that Pakistan has to create growth. And economists say demography is destiny. And if that is the case here, then Pakistan has a very, very rosy future, because you have all these young people coming up and contributing to the economy. Goldman Sachs, who Jim O'Neill works for, say that Pakistan will be in the world's top 20 economies by 2025, so only 12 years away, which would be a hell of a turnaround, but he was right before, so I think it's worthy of note. Secondly, the rule of law. Yes, there is incredible violence, corruption and bloodshed, but there are strong institutions in Pakistan. The Greek, like the British, in some senses, an overmighty military, but which has a very Anglo-centric kind of view. All the top brass of the Pakistan military have gone to Sandhurst. Kayani, who's the current guy, is the first who hasn't. But the strength of the judiciary, that's a big one. The rule of law, you all know how important that is in a country emerging. And its strength was demonstrated in the ousting of Musharraf. If it hadn't been for the lawyers, the last tin pot dictator to to rule over the country wouldn't have been turfed out. And these institutions, they are deeply embedded in Pakistan. It's a very conservative country, but you do get that sense. Another reason to be cheerful. I don't want to dwell too much on this little girl. This is Malala Yousafzai. For people who don't know, one of the reasons that I was in Pakistan, 9th of October last year, on a school bus, which is actually more of a truck. I mean, you see what constitutes a school bus in Pakistan would be amazing. She was shot point blank in the face and neck as a symbol of being an obscenity and an infidel. Her crime was to say that if I don't care if I have to sit on the floor, all I want is an education and I'm not afraid of anybody. I think she lives as a hope for what might be possible in Pakistan, along with what I'm about to show you, which is, I think, a reason to be cheerful. We just completed this nationwide study of the country. Girls should have exactly equal chance to boys in education. If you ask that of the average Pakistani, and this is rural, illiterate, what have you, 94% agree. And I think this is something that is often overlooked. In all this talk of sort of geopolitical games and power structures and all the rest of it, the Pakistani people themselves are not perhaps the extremists that it might be tempting to believe that they are. If there has been a victim over the last 10 years or so, it has been them. But these kinds of values, and there are others that I could show, but I don't need to fall asleep, they do give you cause for optimism. Malala is not, in my opinion, an outlier. She's an extraordinarily brave, but ordinary Pakistani girl, and also their favourite TV show is Australian MasterChef. This is the last bar chart, I promise. We asked about favourability towards, this isn't from our study, this is from Pew Research, but favourability towards the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. There are a couple of interesting things here. Firstly, most obviously, that unfavourable is in excess of 2/3 when it comes to the Taliban, and 62% when it comes to Al-Qaeda. What changes is if you ask the more religious people, they become more distasteful about extremism, not less. So more religious Pakistanis, as defined as people who pray 5 times a day, are far more anti the Taliban, anti-Al-Qaeda. And as I say, it is tempting to picture Pakistan as a sort of nation of wild-eyed extremists foaming at the mouth, waiting to get their hands on a bomb. The rating, the unfavourability rating, if you like, towards the Taliban is exactly the same as towards the US and UK. So it's a sort of it pops on both your houses. There's both sides. This is an average Pakistani school. I took this photo a week ago. It's a couple of things that's worth bearing in mind. Less than half the children in Pakistan ever complete a basic education. That drops to less than a third when it comes to girls. Most schools do lack basic facilities such as running water, reading, writing materials, walls. AliFalan.pk is the inside the country version of the education campaign that we're running. And the idea is to give, particularly using the election as an opportunity to give Pakistani people a voice in this, because as I said, they're often overlooked. And to empower them, given that there's an election on, to hold their politicians to account. The reaction that we got was incredible. Incidentally, you can sign up as well if you like. Within a month of the launch, we had 50,000 people sign up to support the campaign. The objective is, as I say, to provide a mechanism, a tool for people, for Pakistani people to be able to do something about their own situation, because I think they've had enough of the outside interference. I think it's fair to say. So what happens next? If you're watching the election from here, election day is in just over 2 weeks. May the 11th, and then the horse trading begins. Depending on what happens in the actual vote, it seems almost certain that the PMLN, it's the Pakistani Muslim League led by Nawaz Sharif, will be the largest party. It just depends on how his coalition is formed as to who becomes the president, because you've got the National Assembly that elects the president with some other people. Nobody really knows what the result is going to be. We've got pollsters like me descending like flies around whatever around election day. There are 40 million first-time voters. So think about that. That's twice the population of Australia has never voted before. The great question is, what will these people do? They've undoubtedly been inspired by Imran Khan. Whether he can translate that into votes is a whole other thing. And then more sort of realistically and prosaically, there's a debt due in July of this year. Also, it's a turning point for a number of other reasons too. The President, Chief of the Army, and the Chief Justice are all due to stand down this year. If this all happens smoothly, it's potentially hugely optimistic that the economic hurdles are absolutely huge. And in the meantime, that's Mr. Zardari on the right. It's worth pointing out that he doesn't need to stand down constitutionally until December. And somebody said to me the other day, he's been able to hang on for 5 years. He's an incredible deal maker, whatever else you may say about him. Do not underestimate the ability of President Zardari to stick around. This is a signing of a new gas pipeline from Iran to Pakistan. It's worth noting that he has moved away slowly from the US to other alliances. Okay, so to wrap up, don't expect miracles. 2013 and 14 will be incredibly tough for Pakistan, and I've not even started to talk about what happens next door when the International Assistance Force withdraws from Afghanistan. That's a huge unknown. And the next government really does have the in-tray from hell, fixing the economy, trying to manage these sectarian divisions, while just keeping security inside Pakistan's own borders. As everybody knows, the FATA, the federally administered tribal areas, are almost no-go areas for many Pakistani people. And yes, it is unlikely that Pakistan will ever become the West's best friend forever. It's simply not realistic when we come and go as we have done over the decades. But a working relationship is absolutely critical, especially with those elements that aren't anti-West, and they do exist. The reasons for optimism are based on this demographic dividend, and that could really pave the way for quite a dramatic change. I wouldn't expect anything this year or next, but beyond that, Pakistan is potentially due an incredible surge, incredible surge of growth. And the fact that the electorate is so engaged, that you've got a group of people who really do care about the future of their country, desperately want to participate in this election, I think these are all reasons for hope. What is missing so far in all this is real leadership, and that's leadership that doesn't, as it so often does, pander to prejudice, but be honest about policy choices. And I think it's the role of people here and in Washington and London to work with those elements to provide that kind of leadership. Thank you very much for listening. I wish I could. I think it isn't just a sort of media speculation that's identified by the US Joint Chiefs of Staff as the #1 security threat that the world faces is a so-called dirty bomb or a nuclear warhead from Pakistan getting into the hands of an extremist group. Money's too tight to mention, as I say, and what the military has resorted to. I should say that the Pakistan government said absolutely no problem at all. It's absolutely secure, it's a non-issue. But it's known that one of their methods of keeping the nukes secure is driving them around in unmarked vans and convoys, which, if it doesn't alarm you, it should. I think that the first one is the absolutely critical one. How do you find jobs for all these, as I say, over 100 million people under the age of 25? The tax collection thing is really interesting because that's become an issue on the agenda of the aid agencies upon which the country depends, and they're starting to make as one of their criteria for giving aid payment and collection of taxes. And in places like Islamabad, which is stuffed full of sort of rich elitists and diplomats, and obviously not diplomats like in this room, but sort of self-feathering diplomats, they say, with some justification, well, after you. So the British government, as it wants to do this year, wants to start making paying taxes on conditionality of giving them money. They're going to encounter real problems in employing anybody in country because everybody says, well, you first. And the problem with corruption and patronage is so deeply embedded, there's real reluctance or there's disbelief that if I pay my 25% or whatever, then anybody else is going to do the same. And that's why I ended up with leadership, because I think that's going to take somebody with some real obvious sort of values to be the first one to do that. There's talk of amnesty and things like that, but nobody knows how they're going to actually make that happen. Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And as you say, Americans, and it's not just Americans, America, Australia, Britain, they're seen as completely interchangeable. We're all the same. We've all been responsible for the sort of drone attacks and attacks on civilians, that kind of thing. And we've got I think it's negative 75% approval rating. I think what I point out is that he's electioneering, and you've got the difference between realpolitik and what's actually what people say during election time. And look at Egypt. We've got the brothers in charge, but the treaties with America, the aid, as you point out, treaties with Israel have stayed solidly in place because, as you said, they're dependent on it, quite frankly. Firstly, it's very unlikely. You can't just get people because there's a president. The president gets elected by the National Assembly, and his party doesn't exist yet in the Assembly, so he's in a very weak position to sort of become president. If he is, as I say, the most popular politician in the country, though, so you shouldn't discount it. I think if he did get in, there would be huge, there'd be very strong interest, not least the military, not least the other parliamentary parties, not least public opinion, which would say, do not cut this off because the wheels will fall off. There are reasons to suggest as well that Imran is not as sort of intellectually committed to his values as he might appear in his speeches. That's about as diplomatic as I can put it. Yeah, to answer the second question first, yes they do. There's a sort of mass people flying in to have their say. There's some excitement, I think it's fair to say, particularly among the more sort of educated, I don't want to say elites, but segments of the population. I think that, like everywhere else in the world, there's also a group of people who's the same, whoever gets up. The relations with China are, I think they're fascinating, because if you go to Islamabad or Karachi, big cities like that, there are Chinese business people all over the place. Even just the hills around Islamabad, Chinese people going on walking holidays and things like that. I think there are three elements to the relationship. Firstly, it's historical, because when it came to the sort of the great game, the Cold War between America and the USSR, China and Pakistan were allies against the Soviet Union. So there's a historical sort of friendship that goes back that way. Economically, China's a huge investor into Pakistan, but don't have the figures in front of me. It's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, benefactor. But there's not a cultural link there, and that's why I said that I think the relationship with the US is a more interesting question. China and Pakistan will stay friends, but China doesn't give aid to things like education projects. The Americans have just donated an electronic system that will ensure that everybody gets all votes are counted. So 40 million Duff sort of electoral records have been expunged because of that. China doesn't get involved with that kind of development aid for its own ideological reasons. So that's an interesting sort of element to the relationship. But I think it goes back geopolitically and historically and economically a long way. And that's the roots of the friendship.
Very interesting. This gentleman here, I think.
Nick Peterstone, member of the Institute. I spent 9 years as a consultant coming and going in Afghanistan, but in those days, from 96 to 2004, a lot of the UN agencies were based in Islamabad. So, and a couple of, I hope, related points. One is, back in the year 2000, it was very fashionable to talk about who were the great heroes of the 20th century. My mind went to who were some of the great villains, one of whom I might have thought was Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who forced the partition of India and the creation of this unstable state, because I was there when they had their 50th anniversary, and all the English language newspapers were just full of articles about why are we here and what's the purpose of this country. The second issue comes back to, and again I was there when General Musharraf overthrew Nawaz Sharif, and my family were ringing up saying, oh, there's been a coup, you have to leave. And I said, no, don't worry, the local people are all saying, why did it take so long? And is there no serious concern about the return of a thieving bandit like Nawaz Sharif, who almost makes Ali Zardari look like a nice fellow?
Good question. It's a sensational question. I think that's exactly right. It's one of the things I didn't get a chance to say. Is I think the idea that I think a transfer of power is hugely important. The fact that it's transferring to Nawaz Sharif, as you say, who was the guy in charge when the last time India and Pakistan went toe to toe, and the nearest we've ever come to a nuclear war, is exactly right. I think is a cause for concern. On Jinnah, who's the sort of Pakistani answer to Gandhi, I think it's fair to say, it's father of the nation type figure. What's interesting is the way he's kind of in country now. He's been sort of resurrected as this almost godlike figure, and Imran Khan has made great hay out of saying he wants to create Jinnah's Pakistan, which you allude to is not necessarily the greatest result of all. But yeah, it's
20 years ago they were publishing books that said Jinnah said, I got it wrong.
And it's and I think now it's the search for a real leader is palpable. The Pakistanis haven't had one. Musharraf, obviously, with the sort of godlike complex, thinks he was there coming back to save the country. And I think it's almost in desperation with somebody they've attached themselves to the memory of Jinnah as this, lionised him.
Thank you. My name's Britta Bruce, and thank you very much for your presentation. You showed a picture of a very strong legal institution and structure supporting Pakistan. But we've also got the optimistic objective of 2025 of it being quite a dominant country, which means it needs a strong economic base. So how strong is the commercial infrastructure or the institutions that would need to encourage investment in the country, other than from China and the US?
It's a really intelligent question, thank you. And the answer is it's a mixed bag. The physical infrastructure is creaking in terms of power supply. If you wanted to go open a power plant, and this is one of the objections the Iranians had was that, well, how are we supposed to build anything if you can't guarantee that you can turn the lights on at a given point during the day? So the infrastructure is very poor. You have good internet penetration. phone system works all over the country, which is good, especially if you're the Taliban. But I think the real, and that's why I picked it out, I think the real strength is this sort of, is the judicial arm of the government and the attachment to the rule of law. And you know, where else in the world have you seen a lawyers movement that was able to topple a dictator? I think that is, and it is noticeable that even Musharraf coming back as an ex-dictator agreed to abide by sort of various Supreme Court rulings because he simply didn't dare not to. So I think that's quite deeply embedded. Absolutely. There's a couple of points I've made. Firstly, it's quite interesting because it's got 10 times worse since the election was called on March 10th. You go into what you call caretaker government mode. So the politicians disappear, they go off and sort of assemble their vote banks and that kind of thing. And all of a sudden the power outages, the power cuts have quadrupled. So the power goes off every 20 minutes now, whereas it used to be sort of every 2 hours, because the politicians aren't there to dispense patronage anymore, which goes to show how far this sort of patronage system has gone. So I think that's one thing. The other thing is that the government, the incumbent Zardari PPP government has already spent, they've already allocated the entire fiscal year's budget for the first 6 months of this year in an attempt to demonstrate that they've delivered something. So there's no money left. Whoever comes in, they're not going to be able to flick a switch and make the lights come on because the money simply isn't there. It's been spent already. So the situation is dire and it will not get better this year. And that's purely because of the sort of feudal system that the country has of dispensing anything, power, food, according to who you're going to vote for. This dark side of the election. I'd be very interested to see the methodology, because I don't think that's true. I saw something from Pew which came out only a week or so ago, and which was, I don't know, I'd love to take a look at what you've seen, if it is just young people. Nationally though, 3/4 of people chose instability and uncertainty, but a democracy over certainty, security, and a military dictatorship. And I think that's one of the things that you pick up when you're there. There's a very strong sense that people don't want the military in again, and fearing for their own security. I can show you those numbers if you like. I think it's encouraging that people would rather they take the democracy and a bit of chaos over the sheriff coming back and a dictatorship. Yes, we've got a prediction of about 60%, which if that happened would be, that would break a record. So
it's not compulsory, is it?
No, but usually it's in, I think you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's in the 40s. Usually because there's a level of, as you say, sort of predetermination, you know who's going to win. But this time,
it's open.
So I think you've got just under 2/3 of people say they're going to vote, which I think would be a win in itself. I think that it's a fantastic question, and the only answer is on verra. We will see, because nobody knows. That's the biggest known unknown, if you like, of this whole election. Will they stick to the ties of tribal feudal links that they've had in the past, or will these people choose something new and different? The polling, as you indicate, suggests that Imran will achieve some kind of breakthrough, but those ties are very strong too. So it's the great unanswered question of this election. We'll know the answer in about 20 days.
On behalf of the Institute, I'd like to thank Nick Wright for his interesting talk on this very historical election. If we could all deliver a round of applause. The Institute would also like to thank our members and guests for attending tonight's event and for your continued support. We hope to see you again next Tuesday when we have Professor Steve Sherwood talking about climate change, avoiding devastating and long-term impacts. Thank you and have a good evening and have a great night.
Have a great